A storm is brewing in the agriculture sector.
Trump's tariffs are no fun for farmers like me.
Yeah, in one word, it's uncertainty.
Contracts ripped apart overnight. Grain ships stalled at the docks. In just 1 year, 7 of America's closest agricultural partners walked away, choosing Canadian corn over U.S. supply. For American farmers, it's not just lost sales. It's bread missing from tables, livestock feed running dry, and small towns watching their lifeline vanish. One by one, nations are abandoning U.S. corn for Canada's stability, technology, and trust. Advantages America can no longer guarantee. And when you see who's on the list, you'll understand why this isn't just a market shift. It's a generational breaking point. Number 1, China, the superpower's strategic pivot. In a plain office in Beijing, China's agricultural planners reached a chilling conclusion. Their food supply for 1.4 billion people was dangerously vulnerable to American politics. A single decision in Washington could trigger nationwide shortages. For a rising superpower, that was unacceptable. The solution? Build a supply chain beyond U.S. influence. The answer lay in Canada's vast grain fields. China's first Canadian order, 2.3 million tons of corn, wheat, and canola, marked the start of a historic alliance. Unlike U.S. shipments, Canadian grain could bypass American ports, banks, and systems entirely, even using Arctic trade routes. For the first time since World War II, China could secure its food supply independently of America. But this was more than trade. Canadian agriculture brought advanced precision farming, sustainable practices, and genetic research. Chinese scientists joined Canadian labs to develop cold-weather grain, efficient irrigation, and climate-adapted crops. Within years, new agreements expanded to 5.7 million tons annually, plus technology transfers and Arctic logistics partnerships. The impact on U.S. exporters was devastating. Chinese corn orders fell 78%, wheat 84%, soybeans nearly disappeared. America's largest customer was gone. Worse, China began promoting Canadian partnerships across its Belt and Road network, urging nations in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia to follow suit. The ripple effect reshaped entire continents. Today, Canada is China's largest agricultural partner. The alliance spans shipments, joint farmland development, research facilities, and coordinated expansion into global markets. U.S. farmers didn't just lose sales. They lost their strategic role in world food security. China's pivot proved a painful truth. U.S. agricultural dominance was never inevitable. It was optional. And in a world where food security equals national security, that changes everything. So after watching nation after nation pivot away from U.S. corn, the question is clear: how much longer can America hold its place in the global food chain? Number 2, Japan, the precision economy's perfect partner. In Tokyo's financial district, importers watched history unfold. For the first time in 60 years, U.S. corn imports fell below 50% of Japan's total. The decline wasn't gradual. It was executed with the precision that defines Japanese industry. The trouble began in quality labs. American shipments grew inconsistent. Moisture varied, protein levels fluctuated, tolerances slipped. For an economy built on exactness, those flaws were unacceptable. Japanese processors needed corn that met specifications every single time. Canada could deliver. Mitsubishi tested Canadian grain for Wagyu feed, one of the toughest standards in agriculture. Protein within 0.5%, moisture variation under 1%, zero contamination. Canadian shipments exceeded every benchmark, backed by detailed lab reports, advanced drying technology, and multiple verification points. Quality was only the start. Canada offered predictive delivery. Using advanced logistics, exporters guaranteed arrival times within hours, enabling Japan's just-in-time manufacturing model to extend into agriculture. It was a cultural match. Canadian suppliers mirrored Japanese discipline, punctuality, and responsiveness. American exporters, by contrast, treated quality drift and delivery delays as normal tolerances. For Japan, that was unacceptable. The shift accelerated when regulators demanded blockchain traceability. Canada was already prepared. U.S. suppliers lagged. Within 4 years, Canada captured 67% of Japanese corn imports. The partnership deepened. Joint ventures developed specialized grain varieties. Shared research facilities and coordinated logistics bound the two nations' agricultural futures together. The final step came when Japan's largest food conglomerate signed a 10-year exclusive contract with Canadian cooperatives. For American exporters, the message was brutal but clear. Japan hadn't just found a new supplier, it had found a better partner. The precision economy chose precision agriculture, and that meant Canada. Number 3, Mexico, the neighbor's betrayal. The betrayal cut deepest because it came from next door. For over 70 years, Mexico was America's most reliable agricultural customer. Mexican tortilla factories, livestock operations, and food processors built their entire supply chains around U.S. corn. It wasn't just trade, it was family. But family requires trust, and trust once broken is hard to repair. The cracks began with policy uncertainty. Trade agreements shifted with every election. NAFTA became USMCA almost overnight. Tariff threats surfaced during immigration disputes. Routine shipments became bargaining chips in negotiations that had nothing to do with agriculture. The tipping point came when a corn shipment was held at the border for 3 weeks under enhanced inspections. Tortilla factories ran low on raw materials. Livestock feed dwindled. Food processors rationed supplies while corn sat in warehouses. The cost was immediate: $340 million lost in production delays, and tortilla prices spiked nationwide. For Mexican officials, the message was clear. If America could disrupt food supplies over politics, what would happen in a real crisis? How could Mexico feed 130 million people if its lifeline was vulnerable to U.S. moods? The answer came from Canada. A pilot order of 10,000 tons of corn arrived on time, perfectly documented and tailored to Mexican processing standards. No delays, no politics. Canadian suppliers not only delivered reliability, but also superior quality, with grain calibrated for Mexican equipment. The shift shocked North American agriculture. If Mexico, America's closest partner, could find better reliability elsewhere, what did that say to every other U.S. customer? America didn't just lose its largest corn market, it lost the trust of its neighbor. And in agriculture, trust travels faster than grain shipments. Number 4, Saudi Arabia, the Desert Kingdom's strategic shift. In Riyadh's Ministry of Agriculture, a quiet decision sent shockwaves through global grain markets. Saudi Arabia, a nation that imports 85% of its food, was restructuring its supply chain. And for the first time in 40 years, America wasn't invited. For decades, Saudi food security was based on diversification. But when planners reviewed their data, they saw a troubling truth. Despite multiple suppliers, nearly everything still moved through U.S.-controlled routes and systems. What looked like diversification was actually dependence. The wake-up call came when U.S. political volatility disrupted Saudi imports 3 times in just 18 months. Grain shipments became bargaining chips in disputes that had nothing to do with food. In one case, a routine delivery was delayed 10 days under enhanced screenings, costing Saudi mills precious time. War game simulations showed how quickly policy shifts in Washington could trigger shortages across the kingdom. Saudi strategists looked north. Canada offered what America couldn't: independence. Grain shipments that bypassed U.S. ports, banks, and politics. The first Saudi-Canadian deal was modest: 400,000 tons of corn, wheat, and canola annually under a 5-year contract. Fixed prices, guaranteed delivery, zero political interference. What happened next exceeded expectations. Canadian grain arrived with blockchain documentation, traceable from farm to port. Shipments were pre-cleaned for desert storage and packaged to withstand extreme heat. Logistics were optimized to Saudi regulations, with redundant shipping routes and emergency delivery protocols. Canada didn't treat the kingdom as just another customer. It treated food security as a strategic partnership. The alliance deepened. Canadian agri-tech firms set up operations in Saudi Arabia, developing desert farming systems, advanced irrigation, and climate-controlled storage. Within 3 years, Canada was supplying 67% of the kingdom's grain imports. Saudi Arabia invested $2.3 billion into Canadian infrastructure, grain terminals, processing plants, and research hubs, building permanent ties that no political storm could disrupt. The message across the Middle East was clear. If Saudi Arabia could free its food security from America, others could too. Losing Saudi Arabia was devastating. But what came next would strike even deeper, at the very heart of America's agricultural empire. Number 5, Vietnam, the pivot that changed everything. The message was only 12 words long. Switching to Canadian suppliers effective immediately. Thanks for everything. With that text, Vietnam's largest feed manufacturer ended a 20-year relationship with U.S. corn exporters and rewrote Southeast Asia's grain trade. The decision wasn't born in a boardroom, but in the rice paddies and fish farms of the Mekong Delta. Farmers were exhausted by price swings tied to U.S. political drama. Every trade dispute with China meant higher feed costs in Vietnam. Every tariff fight delayed shipments. Shrimp and fish farms hemorrhaged money because input costs shifted week to week. Even exports to third countries were dragged into U.S. trade wars, costing Vietnam business it had nothing to do with. A government review revealed the danger. 78% of agricultural imports came directly from the U.S. or through U.S.-controlled channels. One decision in Washington could disrupt food supplies for 97 million people. That risk was unacceptable. Canada offered what America no longer could: stability. Corn contracts priced on fundamentals, not geopolitics. 5-year agreements immune to election cycles or trade wars. Early test shipments from Canada arrived on time, at consistent quality, with political neutrality baked in. The results were dramatic. Fish farmers discovered Canadian grain, tailored precisely to aquaculture nutrition, boosting growth rates and survival. Cooperatives restructured supply chains around Canada, unlocking predictability that allowed them to invest in new equipment, expand operations, and take international contracts with confidence. Agricultural productivity rose 23% in the first year. By 2025, Vietnam's corn imports had flipped from 78% American to 89% Canadian. The reliability revolution spread across Southeast Asia as neighbors watched Vietnam break free from America's political volatility, and the partnership grew deeper. Canadian firms set up research centers in Vietnam, focusing on tropical aquaculture, climate-adapted grains, and sustainable farming. Vietnamese students earned scholarships to study agriculture in Canada. What began as a grain shift became a structural alliance. For American exporters, the shock was total. Vietnam, once one of their most reliable markets, had quietly walked away and taken much of Southeast Asia with it. Number 6, South Korea. The tech giant's quiet revolution. South Korea prides itself on efficiency. In a country where technology drives every industry, food processors demanded agricultural suppliers who could match their standards. Real-time tracking, blockchain verification, and instant digital documentation. American corn exporters were stuck in the past. A shipment sat 3 weeks at Busan port as inspectors pieced together scattered paperwork. Some handwritten, some unverifiable. The corn was fine, but the system was broken. Meanwhile, a Canadian shipment that arrived the same day cleared in 48 hours. Every kernel was traceable back to its field, every document instant and verifiable. The contrast was staggering. Korean buyers weren't just purchasing corn, they were buying certainty. In a just-in-time economy, American delays had become intolerable bottlenecks. Canadian exporters offered full transparency, QR codes linked to databases showing soil conditions, harvest dates, moisture levels, and contamination tests. Shipments were tracked in real time, from farm to factory. When Samsung's food division needed 200,000 tons of corn, American suppliers weren't even considered. The contract went directly to Manitoba, where deliveries met deadlines within hours, and quality was precise to the decimal. Regulators reinforced the trend by mandating full traceability. Canadian firms, already using blockchain-based systems, complied effortlessly. U.S. exporters were still digitizing their records. Within 2 years, South Korea had restructured its corn supply chain entirely around Canada. The results: 34% faster processing, 67% fewer paperwork delays, and zero disruptions. Korean manufacturers cut inventory buffers and redirected focus to innovation. The partnership soon expanded. Korean tech firms began collaborating with Canadian agriculture companies on next-generation farming equipment. Investment in Canadian agritech surged 340%, building integrated supply chains between Seoul and Saskatchewan. American exporters lost one of their most reliable markets, not because of politics or tariffs, but because they failed to adapt. In the digital age, reliability alone wasn't enough. You had to be smart, connected, and transparent. South Korea chose the future, and the future was Canadian. But even this digital revolution was only a prelude to the seismic supply chain shifts unfolding across Southeast Asia. Number 7. Egypt. The first crack in the foundation. The collapse of American agricultural dominance didn't happen overnight. It began with Egypt. At 3 a.m. Cairo time, an exhausted grain buyer canceled the country's largest corn contract in 5 years. Not because of price or quality, but because of something far more dangerous: uncertainty. "We cannot build our bread supply on shifting sand," he said quietly before hanging up. For over 3 decades, Egyptian mills had relied on corn from Illinois and Iowa. It powered livestock, fed bakeries, and sustained 104 million people. That reliability began eroding with trade wars, tariff battles, and sudden policy reversals. Importers feared a single tweet could upend supply chains overnight. When one shipment was delayed 2 weeks for redundant documentation, Egyptian bakeries started rationing flour. The trust was gone. Canada saw the opening. Alberta grain representatives didn't promise lower prices. They promised reliability, fixed-price contracts for 5 years, delivery schedules immune to politics, paperwork that met international standards without endless clarifications. The first test order of 50,000 tons arrived on time, with flawless paperwork and perfectly calibrated quality. Waste dropped, efficiency rose, and within 18 months, Egypt signed an $847 million annual contract with Canada. The shift was silent but decisive. American exporters discovered they had been replaced only when calls went unanswered and renewals never came. A 30-year partnership ended not with argument, but with silence. Today, Cairo's bread is baked from Saskatchewan wheat, its livestock fed on Manitoba grain. American silos overflow with unsold corn, while farmers watch in disbelief. Egypt's unspoken message was clear: we need food security, not political theater. Egypt's departure sent ripples across global markets, and it was only the first sign of how fragile America's agricultural dominance truly was.